Grand Rising, Grand Rising. How y'all doing? Give me a moment to apply this to my other social media accounts. I appreciate you. Hope your today is great, and it will be, I promise. Grand Rising. How was your night? I got more rest than expected, but I'm up and at 'em right now. I ain't gonna play with it. Gotta get through it. Yeah, I'm looking for. There we go. Hmm, interesting. I was under the impression I used the same thumbnail as yeah. I was under the same impression I used the same thumbnail as the book cover for Blueprint for Black Power, but I guess I'm still waking up. So if you could just give me a moment, it's going to take a second, but this also gives you a moment to set up. So you got about so far it's been 2 minutes. I figure it'll take about 3 or 4 minutes to do this because that's what it does, and I'll get better as time goes on. Okay, now let's see. I feel like it's a way that I could post this to TikTok. So, oh yeah, got one right there. Yeah, I know I'm a little quiet. Also, if you go look in the description, there's some free resources in there. So, if you can take advantage of them, by all means, go ahead. Just look in the description, click the links, and it doesn't cost you anything. And I think description is going to be under this video. Okay. Trying to see if they're gonna let me live on TikTok, but it don't look like. If you know how to post something from YouTube to TikTok, let me know. I don't know. I literally just got TikTok. I'm like the last person, but that's how it is. I hope your today is great and may your tomorrow be greater. Okay, sorry for the wait. Sorry for the wait. Okay, so here we are, October 8th, early morning, and we begin with chapter 2, Basis of Power. I'm reading from Blueprint for Black Power. And if this isn't for you, I kindly like you to share it, you know. And if it's not for you, go ahead. Like this ain't for you, no problem. This is what I do. Welcome to the Reading Cipher, where we promote listening and reading to support the rise in leadership in our own communities. So what I'm doing is finding books that I like that have been influential and impactful for me as an individual. But if you like, share, and subscribe, you can email me at omnipotentjock@gmail.com. You can also text me or call me at 347-674-3651. That's 347-674-3651. At some point, I'll probably put omnipotentjock@gmail.com in the comments, but it won't be hard to find that. I also have the Kyrie Collection, which you can find on Instagram. However, I'm isolated out of the phone, but you can see some of the jewelry and heirlooms that we create. We got some candles coming from Alluring Mama. Them are some of the best candles I've ever seen or had the pleasure to burn, right? We got a lot of good things coming. If you're in Buffalo, New York, I urge you on Mondays between 4 and 6 p.m. to go to the Jefferson Library or the Meriwether Library at Jefferson Avenue and East Utica Streets from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., where we have the African Conscious Workshop. It's calling you. Come on home. Okay. What else? Shout out to all of the cities and all of the hosts in the Race First movement. And when I say Race First, if you don't know what that means, I mean thought and behavior that places the social, economic, spiritual well-being, and overall material survival of the Black race first to facilitate African sovereignty. Nah, we don't hate anybody. We just want to look out for ourselves. Like any other creature or organism is doing its job to maintain and sustain its life, we must do the same, because the only people obligated to make sure that we survive are us. And according to the master teachers, we don't have any friends. After 479 years of being treated, neglected, disrespected, and much, much more, it's time for us to come together with undivided wholeness and move forward as a nation. But it starts with liberating your mind, and that's the reason why I'm here, so that I can show you some of the things that have allowed me to realize where we are and what we can do with what we have. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 2. Basis of power, organization and ethnic resources. Overconcentration of power resources is dangerous. Under-concentration of power resources is equally as dangerous. Conflict is an inescapable social fact. Power struggles are not necessarily bad, and that was by Alvin Toffler in Power Shift. For social power to be exercised effectively, the power holder must possess or control some important or valued material and or social resource or sources, which is the basis of his power. By strategically rewarding or depriving others of these resources, he may use them to influence behavior in ways compatible with his interests. Resources, when used for such ends, are referred to as power bases or resources. Power bases or resources may include physical safety, health and well-being, wealth and material possessions, jobs and a means to a livelihood, knowledge and social skills, social recognition, status and prestige, love, affection, social acceptability, a satisfactory self-image, and self-respect. Dye rightly cautions that power is not a thing exclusively possessed by an individual or group, but essentially refers to the nature of a relationship between individuals, groups, and institutions within the social system in which some individuals or groups have applicable control over certain vital or important social and material resources needed or desired by others. Social power is based or rests on social desires and needs, Toffler, 1990, asserts forthrightly that because people have needs and desires, those who can fulfill them hold potential power. Social power is exercised by supplying or withholding the social power is exercised by supplying or withholding the desired or needed items and experiences. A power relationship and the inequality between the parties in such a relationship presuppose that the weaker party either lacks appropriate power resources or relatively fewer of them, or if he possesses them, does not possess the will and or the ability to employ them effectively in his interest. We have no intentions to review the quite sizable number of possible power bases here. We shall constrain ourselves to brief but pertinent discussions of those power resources which are of important relevance to Africans in America and the power relations between them and European Americans. These power resources include property, organization, race consciousness, and ideology. We do not include state politics in our discussion at this juncture because in the context of contemporary African-American social, political, and economic culture and the more basic issues it must resolve, state politics is of secondary importance to the Black community. Black politics and activism without the Black ownership of and control over primary forms and bases of power, such as property, wealth, organization, etc., is the recipe for Black political and non-political powerlessness. The rather obtuse pursuit of political office and the ballot box as primary sources of power by the Black community and its politicians without its concomitant ownership of and control over important resources has actually hindered the development of real Black power in America. Just briefly, if you haven't heard of the ballot or the bullet, I suggest you go and Google Malcolm X. He's saying the same thing. More ominously, there appears to be a paradoxical and positive correlation between the number of Blacks elected and appointed to high office and retrogressions in the civil and human rights extended to Black Americans during the past 20 years. Increases in homelessness, poverty, unemployment, criminality, and violence in the Black community, disorganization of the traditional Black family, inadequacies in education, increases in health problems of all types, and a host of other social and political ills have all attended increases in the number of Black elected and appointed officials. That is, the more elected and appointed Black politicians, the more social economic problems the Black community has suffered. Let me repeat it for you so you can understand why that voting thing is really a setup. The more elected and appointed Black politicians, the more social economic problems the Black community has suffered. Fact. While we are not implying a causal relationship between the increase of the number of Black appointed and elected officials and the increased misery indices of the Black community, we are implying or asserting that their increase obscures those things which are responsible for and do little to ameliorate or uproot the increasing prevalence of social and economic problems in the Black community. The community's concern with the election and appointment of Black political figures helps it to maintain false hopes that their attainment of office will significantly resolve its problems. The activities of Black politicians, given the current inadequacy of social organization and economic resources, harmfully distract the Black community's attention from recognizing and eradicating the true causes of its problems and the remediation of its powerlessness. So it wasn't so much getting at them like, oh, they're the purpose. It's more of a distraction because it just makes it look like we're getting along. We got opportunity. We're not focusing on the right thing. That's all the distractions that they can continue maintaining their power. We shall presently look at ethnic groups whose economic, educational, social, and political progress in America have been phenomenal and often surpasses that of Black Americans, yet who have not acquired one elected or appointed official to high political office. We will see that it has been and is their effective acquisition and application of more fundamental power values or resources, which are far more responsible for their progress and power than their political electoral activism or lack of it. In our ensuing discussion of these bases of power, we will therefore put first things first, and Black American politics as usual is not one of these. Property and power. It seems appropriate at this juncture to emphasize a statement made by Thomas Dye, D-Y-E. Power is never equally distributed. There is no power where power is equal. For power to be exercised, the power holder must control base values. Inequality of power in social systems is correlated with inequality of the distribution of power resources within them. The distribution of power resources is rarely, if ever, the distribution of power sources is rarely, if ever, randomly distributed among the individual and group constituents of a society. As we have already intimated, inequality of power between individuals and groups must evolve from their unequal share of important or relevant resources of power, among which includes property, wealth, organization, social prestige, social legitimacy, number of adherents, various kinds of knowledgeability and leadership skills, technological skills, control of jobs, control of information, ability to manipulate the symbolic environment, and ability to apply force and violence. It is the first two items on this list we shall now very briefly discuss. Property, wealth, and power. Property and wealth represent a class of power resources commonly referred to as economic resources. As Dye contends, control of economic resources provides a continuous and important base of power in any society. Economic organizations decide the basic economic questions of who gets what. Economic power is the power to decide what will be produced, how much it will cost, how many people will be employed, what their wages will be, what the price of goods and services will be, what profits will be made, how these profits will be distributed, and how fast the economy will grow. Dye, 1983. In capitalistic America, the foundation of economic power is private property, whose ownership not only refers to real estate, but also to the ownership of the means of production of accumulated capital. Example, factories and machinery, etc. Wealth, surplus production, or surplus material goods as belonging to private individuals or groups instead of to the people or nation as a whole. Racial and class domination fundamentally involves the unequal interaction between the owners of property and wealth and the property less and poor, the great power residing in the hands of the first group. The concept of property in advanced capitalist societies is complex. Property resources is owned by private individuals and private institutions rather than the society or government. Example, private property is one of the central defining characteristics of capitalist ideology and societies. The private ownership of property refers to far more than the ownership of concrete things like land, houses, factories, personal items, production tools, machinery, and the like. Property also refers to rights and interests and claims in and to things, to certain privileges relative to things, people, and activities. This includes property as a right of use of disposition. The private ownership of things, rights, and claims as property combined with the right and the freedom to negotiate binding legal contracts permits private persons or businesses to obtain, control, employ, and dispose of property resources as they see fit. In sum, Bazelon reminds us to think of property as being of two kinds: thing property and rights property. The latter may refer to pieces of paper like stock certificates and bonds representing certain direct entitlements relating to certain things or productive activities, such as the right on one person of the fruit of another's labor. Bazelon goes on to remind us that money and credit are simply the most generalized and so most obvious form of property. Ultimately, property is what the state, as adjudicated by its legislative bodies and courts, says it is: the things, rights, claims, and privileges to which the state accords its enforcement and protection. The central function of the modern state is the protection and regulation of the private property system, to defend the owners of property and wealth from the propertyless and poor. With the ownership or claim to certain properties and rights goes the right to exercise certain privileges and powers from which those who do not own or hold claim to those properties and rights are excluded. The ownership of property demarcates, demarcates, the borderline between inclusion and exclusion. With the ownership of property comes the right to exercise more rights and privileges than comes with the lack of ownership. Consequently, the ownership of property is one of the most important bases of power. Beetham elaborates this point. Central to the social organization of power are the processes of exclusion, typically embodied in rules which prohibit general access to key resources and which determine who may acquire the use or possession of them and by what means. These are usually called rules of property, and it is through the possession of or the privileged access to property that some people acquire and maintain power over others who lack or are denied such access. Hence, power relations are inextricably reflective of property relations. The dominance and subordination of classes and races are constituted by the power deriving from the ownership of property, more so from control over key resources and the means of production. The propertyless classes and races, by the fact of their propertylessness, are compelled to bow to the demands of the propertied as a condition for obtaining their daily bread. Therein is the basis for dominance and subordination. The unequal distribution the unequal distribution of power between whites and blacks in America, in accordance with the greater ownership of property and capital, and therefore power by whites, did not originate from the fabled economic genius of the former relative to the lack of it in the latter. White power, based on the white monopolistic ownership of property and accumulated capital, is the alchemical product of blood and fire. Example of the genocidal murder of whites of Native Americans, the outright theft of their lands and resources, the brutal enslavement and murder of Africans, as well as the naked direct exploitation of their uncompensated labor, all made possible by the unrestrained use of white instigated physical violence, psychic terrorism, and psychopolitical economic manipulation. Africans were brought to the Americas as the private property of Europeans. The surplus production of their labor was expropriated and accumulated both during and after their enslavement. This, along with the theft of Indian lands, are the fundamental sources of European American. This, along with the theft of Indian lands, are the fundamental sources of European American, African American property power relations to this very moment. Moreover, white America's long history of 100% racial quotas in favor of whites and its use of racial discrimination as a standard form of cartel power, the United States is the biggest mafia in the world, has provided whites and some of their non-white immigrant group imitators with the property means of bending the will and shaping the behavior of relatively propertyless, dependent Black Americans. Cross depicts this relationship in tables 2.1 and 2.2. You got to get the book to see that. I'm gonna read it, but I don't know if you'll need the book. I'm positive you will. I'll try to even show you. In capitalistic America, since with property comes power, it stands to reason that if Africans in America are to obtain substantial and sustainable power, they must obtain control of substantial property and with it, substantial economic power. The rapid accumulation and applied organization of property and wealth by any means necessary must become top priority goals of the African and American community if it is to maximally ensure its own future survival and well-being. The accumulation and organization of property and wealth as a means of securing their survival, enhancing their well-being and power are imperative for immigrant groups entering the establishing themselves in the United States. Adherence to these imperatives are in good part responsible for their remarkable economic progress compared to the relative economic stagnation of Africans in America. A review of the tables 2.1 and 2.2 indicates the contrary to the Horatio Auger myths and the myths of individualism, where the rugged individuals gain fame and fortune through frugality, thriftiness, dogged determination, and creativity, or through the convenience of marrying into wealth, or or through the convenient receipt of a huge helping hand from some doting wealthy benefactor. The principal means by which white men gain wealth and power is through aggressive, ruthless, race-based organization. Let me repeat that. The principal means by which white men gain wealth and power is through aggressive, ruthless, race-based organization. The history of white American capitalism and wealth creation and the generation of near tyrannical white political economic power is replete with the organization and violent operation of white race-based cartels, syndicates, rings, private armies, gangs, and thugs. The captains of American industry, by all sorts of nefarious and violent means, literally organized or seized control of federal, state, and local governments in order to cede to themselves all types of special benefits, protections, and keys to the public treasure. Government, business, and the military, those entities which have permitted white America to dominate the national and world industrial complex from their inception until this very moment, are essentially exclusive organizations and the special preserves of the white male ruling elite and of white men in general. The American economic system, as its system of government, its military and paramilitary system, as well as its religious and media systems, the key power systems of any modern society, are systems organized by, of, and for white men versus black men, white people versus black people, and these systems are not the creation of Adam Smith's mythical invisible hands guiding self-interested, self-serving individuals into the coincidental building and equilibrated, EQUILIBRATED market economy, free market, and democratic government. These systems work and are constructed and operated by highly conscious and deliberate men, men well aware of what they are about and what it is they want to achieve, the holy grail of power and the perks of power. These organizations and systems can only be neutralized or defeated by counterpoised organizations and systems and the oppositional consciousness which informs them. I repeat to you, you must be intentional. You're not going to get wealthy or gain financial freedom enough to build generational wealth if you're not intentional about it. I understand it's hard to go to work and come home and spend 2 or 3 hours reading something that you're not familiar with, trying to understand it, writing notes, taking care of the kids, cooking, cleaning. I get it. Trust me. I get it. I do it every day. I promise you. Right? But it's needed. It's required. And the only people obligated to put us in this position of financial freedom and building generational wealth, the only people obligated to do that for us is us. I'm not going to show you this because I feel like it's too small for me to read. I'm going to have to go and grab the magnifying glass to read it because, you know, it's like a chart and it's very small. It's smaller than the writing I'm reading. So let me read this next part. organizations and institutions as power resources. Power, particularly its effective exercise to achieve certain ends, does not flow solely from the ownership and control of property as thing and property as right. Effective working power, the essence of social power, requires the coordinated organization of power resources. It is not the mere possession of power resources and of the power which flows from their possession which enables some groups to dominate others, but it is more so the organization of power on the part of the dominant group in contrast to the relative disorganization of the subordinate group, which may possess potentially more powerful human and or material resources than the dominating group, which ensures their control over the subordinate group. We concur with Beetham when he asserts that the relative differences of power between people are largely the result of social arrangements, and the relations of power between them are typically the product of collective organization. Emphasis added. To paraphrase Beetham, the manner in which a group's internal social relations, example, power relations, are organized has obvious consequences for the power of the group and of the society as a whole. For as Beetham further contends, it is rare for subordinate groups to lack any means of power of their own, even if it takes the defensive form of a power of limitation over veto in face of the power of initiative exercised by the dominant. The subordinate are often more numerous, and their contribution within the social division of labor and within the social division of consumption makes them indispensable as a group to the dominant. He goes on to argue that essentially one of the purposes of the organization of power on the part of the dominant is to ensure the relative disorganization among the subordinate. Thus, the subordinate, through effective social organization, may enable themselves to change the nature and outcomes of the power relations between the dominant and themselves, perhaps to the extent of revolutionizing those relations. Even if we were to argue that the individual and that individual behavior are the foundation of social systems and the powers they manifest, we still must give due respect to power born of organization. The power man represents in the world, whether as individual or group, is a power operationally founded on physical, mental, and social organization and on the organized behavior which flows therefrom. Hence, human social organization, not mere individual self-interested behavior, is central to the generation and an application of power. Black people, I gotta repeat this because a lot of us think it's just about us. Yes, you gotta save yourself first, but your life is bigger than your own, and you're obligated to make sure that you and those like you survive. So each one teach one. Let me repeat the phrase. Hence, human social organization, not mere individual self-interested behavior, is central, key to the generation and application of power. The upcoming discussion of ethnically based development amply supports the assertion made by Adolf Burrow that no collective category, no class, no group of any kind in and of itself wields power or can use it. Another factor must be present, that of organization. Burrow goes on to correctly contend that power is invariably organized and transmitted through institutions. Social organization refers to the interactive uniting of a number of persons into a group who, through the structured use of their aggregate resources, act to achieve the group's purpose and goals as alluded by Rome. The more people who contribute their holdings or personal, social, and or material resources to a common pool, the greater the aggregate resources to pursue a group's goals and enhance its powers are likely to be. As Galbraith in 1983 asserts, through organization, a group and the individuals who constitute it or speak and act according to its mandates may thereby gain access to condign, compensatory, and especially to conditioned power. Organized groups, as collective actors controlling resources, provide themselves with the capacity to exercise power over non-members, the general public, particular clienteles, the local community, and political leaders. A lot of people believe that the politicians run the country, and they're forgetting that it's the corporate forms of businesses that run the politicians. I don't want to bore you. I feel like I've put in enough. So that's just going to be the first part But again, if you've joined the live, I appreciate you. If you donated, may the ancestors bless you a thousandfold. And there are free resources under the description. So if you're on Facebook, you probably just got to go to YouTube, go to Omnipotent, the Reading Cipher, subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the all notification bell so that you can get any of our updates on anything that we're doing. And click the description to show more and go ahead and get you some of those free resources and, add on to what you're already doing. I appreciate you. Thank you for coming. As always, race first and race first at all times. Hotep family, I hope your today is great and your tomorrow is greater.